My family called me a disgrace at my brother's promotion party. My dad said, "You are my oldest son, but I regret being your dad. You are such a shame." I had worked for him all my life. So I calmly walked out of the house and left to start a new life for myself. Few years later, they needed me. "Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Harvey from Washington. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into today's story. I didn't expect a celebration, but I didn't expect to be gutted in front of 50 people either. The room smelled like polished wood and overcooked steak, filled with the clinking of wine glasses and the easy laughter of men who'd never been humiliated. My younger brother stood beside our father, all polished smiles and new promotion glow, soaking in the praise like it was sunlight. I stood off to the side, hands in my pockets, sipping soda because someone had to drive. I'd worn the same navy blazer I always wore to these things, the one with the frayed lining in the left pocket that no one noticed but me. It had survived meetings, breakdowns, and at least 2 funerals. It would survive tonight, too. My father's voice was always too loud when he was proud. "That's my boy," he boomed, hand clapping my brother's back like he was staking a claim. "VP before 30. That's what I call legacy." Then his eyes landed on me, sharp and deliberate, like he'd been waiting for the cue to pivot. "And you," he added, raising his glass slightly in my direction. "You're my oldest son, but damn if I don't regret that some days." Laughter. Not loud, not from everyone. Just enough to let me know it wasn't a mistake. I smiled in a small, polite hollow. I'd learned long ago not to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But something inside me leaned back, quiet and alert, like a dog tethered just tight enough to not lunge. "You've worked at the company for what, 15 years now," he went on, still grinning, still holding court. "And somehow, you've managed to stay exactly where you started. I mean, if loyalty were success, maybe you'd have a shot." His eyes flicked to the crowd, milking their amusement. But let's be honest, sometimes loyalty just means fear in a suit. A few people chuckled. My mother didn't look at me. She just reached for another glass of wine, eyes glazed over like she was watching a movie she'd seen too many times. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. I just watched the way his mouth curled around those words, like they were candy, like humiliation was his favorite dessert. I remembered the first summer I worked under him. 16 years old, filing invoices and staying late to sweep the floors, thinking that if I just kept my head down and learned everything, he'd see me. He did see me. He just didn't like what he saw. Someone near me muttered, "Man, that's cold." But they didn't say it loud enough to matter. I finished my drink and set it on the buffet table, right beside the untouched shrimp cocktail. Then I straightened my blazer, nodded once, more to myself than to anyone else, and walked toward the front door. Nobody stopped me. Not one person in that room said my name. Outside, the night air was thick and damp, the kind of air that clings to your skin like guilt. I didn't look back at the house. I just walked down the driveway, slow and steady, like a man who had nowhere left to be and no one left to perform for. My car was parked under the sycamore tree that had once dropped branches on my first bike. I remember bleeding from the knee, crying, and my father saying, "Toughen up. Life's not going to wait for you to get brave." He was right. Life hadn't waited. And I wasn't crying now. I got in the car and sat there with the engine off, fingers gripping the steering wheel like it might fly away if I let go. I thought about texting someone, my cousin in Maine, maybe, or even Claire, though she hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. But what would I even say? They finally said it out loud. "I'm the shame now. Officially." No, I didn't want pity. I didn't want anyone sorry or that's not fair. I just wanted silence. Clean, unclaimed silence. I drove until the highway stopped looking familiar. 2 hours south, maybe 3. The sky turned the kind of black that doesn't reflect anything back at you. I pulled into a motel with peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights, paid in cash, and told the clerk I'd be staying a few days. Maybe more. Inside the room, the sheets were stiff and the carpet smelled like old cigarettes, but the door locked and no one knew my name. That was enough. I lay on the bed with my arms crossed, eyes open. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. There's a difference. Anger wants to fight. Heartbreak wants to be seen. But done just wants to disappear. They had made me into a ghost long before I ever left. All I did now was finish the job. And somewhere deep in that silence, under the motel ceiling with its cracks and water stains, I made a promise to myself, not revenge, not justice. Just one clean vow. I will never go back. Not for them. Not for closure. Not even for forgiveness. They want to be gone. So I left. And that's the night my real life quietly began. The motel room became a kind of cocoon. Ugly. Yes. But safe in the way nothing expected anything from me. No one called. No one knocked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't anyone's son, anyone's disappointment, anyone's underachieving shadow. I was just a man with a suitcase, a bruised ego, and a $700 severance check my father thought would shut me up. He didn't even hand it to me himself. My mother slid it into my coat pocket the morning after the party, without looking me in the eye. No note. Just money to vanish. So I did. I drove south until the signs turned unfamiliar and the weather stopped pretending to be polite. I passed half-dead towns with rusting silos and empty main streets, the kinds of places people forget to put on maps. I stopped when I saw a sign that read, "Rooms by the week." Kitchenette included. The carpet was threadbare and the faucet leaked, but the rent was cheap and the manager didn't ask questions when I paid a month in advance. That first night, I cooked scrambled eggs on a dented hot plate and ate them with plastic cutlery like it was a ritual cleansing. No wine, no speeches, just silence and salt. I got a job washing dishes at a diner 3 blocks away. The owner, Art, was an ex-Marine who wore the same denim apron every day and didn't believe in second chances unless you showed up early and didn't complain. I liked him immediately. He hired me on the spot, $15 an hour under the table. No questions about my past, no forms. You work, you stay, he said. You fuck around, you leave. Simple rules. Honest ones. I could live with that. I woke up before sunrise every day, walked through the sticky humidity, and stood elbow-deep in greasy water for 8 hours straight. It was brutal, repetitive, soul-killing work, and somehow, it saved me. There was no legacy here. No promotion parties. Just broken plates and burnt eggs and the ache in my hands that reminded me I was real. I didn't have to be proud of myself. I just had to be consistent. And I was. I took night classes 3 times a week at the community college downtown. Not business courses, not management, finance. Cold, brutal numbers. I wanted to understand the system that had used me and discarded me. I wanted to learn how power worked, how it was built, how it collapsed. I didn't tell anyone my last name. I used my middle name, Elias, as a surname and filled out forms like I'd just been born. No one questioned it. No one cared. Everyone there was running from something. I lived like that for 2 years. No friends, no holidays, no birthdays. I sent no postcards, made no calls. I figured they'd already written me off, buried me in the ledger of failures and disgraces. Maybe they even pitied me, imagined me living out of my car or begging for food. I let them. Their imagination was just another lie they told themselves to avoid the truth that I'd been holding their foundation together, and now the cracks were starting to show. I heard rumors through the grapevine. My cousin in Maine sent a single email with no subject line. He's floundering without you. Your brother's getting cocky. Just thought you'd want to know. I didn't reply. What was there to say? I rented a storage unit and started building something small freelance accounting work for local businesses that couldn't afford firms, under a name that didn't trace back to me. I was careful. Everything was anonymous, encrypted, quiet. Within 6 months, I had a steady client base. Within a year, I had doubled what my father used to pay me. By the end of the 2nd year, I was consulting for startups in 3 states, still using burner emails, still hiding in plain sight. They never knew it was me. That was the point. I never looked at the company's website, never checked their numbers. But sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine the boardroom without me, the missing reports, the misfiled taxes, the compliance holes I used to patch without being asked. I imagined the tension in my father's jaw, the panic he would never say out loud. And it didn't make me smile. It didn't make me angry, either. It just made me feel clean. Like I'd walked out of a burning building and, for once, wasn't carrying the ashes. There were moments I missed them. Not the people they were, but the people I used to believe they were. I missed thinking my father was a titan worth following. I missed believing my brother was someone to be proud of. I even missed my mother's passive silence, the kind that made me feel invisible, but at least tethered to something. Missing them was like missing a dream you didn't realize was a nightmare until you woke up. One night, after a 14-hour shift and a 2-hour cram session on capital markets, I walked past a pawn shop with a cracked window and saw something in the display case that stopped me cold, a gold watch. Same model my father wore. Same scratch on the band. For a split second, I thought maybe he'd lost it, or sold it, or maybe someone had pawned it for him. But then I realized how stupid that was. It was just a watch, just an object. Still, I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, watching my reflection in the glass, trying to figure out why it felt like staring at a ghost. By the third year, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The place smelled like yeast and burnt sugar, and I had a view of the alley where cats fought at night and kids spray-painted their names into the future. I liked it. It was mine. No family photos on the walls. No trophies. Just silence and books, and the soft hum of a life I'd built with my own hands. They never came looking. Not once. Not even a half-hearted message or a drunk voicemail. I think that hurt more than the betrayal itself, not that they had pushed me out, but that they never thought I was worth bringing back in. And yet, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even waiting for them to fail. I was simply becoming someone they couldn't touch anymore. And that, I think, was the beginning of everything. You don't always feel it when the scar forms. Sometimes you just wake up and realize the pain has dulled into something colder, cleaner, quieter. Not healed exactly, but sealed. Like your body has decided it's done bleeding for people who never noticed they'd cut you. I noticed it the morning I declined a call from a number that began with my hometown's area code. It rang once, twice, then went silent. I stared at the screen long after it stopped. Didn't call back. Didn't even feel tempted. I just put the phone face down and went back to slicing open tax documents for a small hardware chain that still kept paper records. My life had become simple, structured, safe, and most importantly, mine. I didn't want to let them back in, even as a whisper. By then, I had a routine that fit me like skin. Work from 6 to 3, study from 4 to 9, then quiet dinners with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the crackle of whatever old record the bakery owner downstairs had playing. Some nights I'd sit on the fire escape with a cold drink and just watch the city breathe, windows blinking on and off, the sounds of distant arguments and laughter and ambulance sirens. The city didn't know me. The city didn't expect anything from me. That's why I loved it. But even in the peace I'd carved, there were reminders, small, uninvited echoes that slipped in through the cracks. A man at the diner once shouted at his teenage son in a tone I knew too well, and my hands clenched around the mop handle like I was back in my father's office, being called incompetent for a mistake that wasn't mine. A woman came into the shop asking about bulk accounting and said, "You remind me of my son. He never speaks up either." I nodded and smiled, but I didn't sleep that night. Some scars live in your posture. I found a photo one day wedged inside an old economics textbook I'd bought used. It was me and my brother, maybe 8 and 6, sitting on the edge of a dock, legs swinging, half smiling. I don't remember the photo being taken, but I remember the dock. It was the last summer before my father put me to work in the warehouse, told me I needed to earn my keep. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering if the boy in it had any idea who he'd become. Then I tore it clean down the middle and burned it in a coffee tin. That felt like a funeral, and maybe it was. At some point, you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. You stop fantasizing about confrontations or poetic speeches that make them see the light. You stop checking their social media, if you ever did, and you stop playing out the scenes where they finally say, "We were wrong. We failed you." That fantasy is just another chain. And I was done with chains. Instead, I began focusing on what I could build quietly, strategically. I reinvested my freelance income into a holding company I created from scratch under a different name. I bought assets. 2 vending machines near college dorms, a laundromat in foreclosure, a failing bookstore I converted into a niche finance education hub. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable, but everything stable. I wasn't chasing wealth. I was chasing freedom, and freedom, I learned, often grows in silence. Around the fourth year, I got word through an old high school friend who didn't know I'd vanished that the family business had started to slip. Apparently, some major client had walked after discovering accounting discrepancies. My father blamed a junior analyst. My brother was promoted again, this time to manage the books. The irony nearly made me laugh. He never understood numbers, just how to make them look good. But people like him don't need to understand the systems they benefit from. They just need someone like me to quietly hold the net underneath. But I wasn't holding it anymore. And soon, I heard about layoffs, missed contracts, lawsuits whispered about but not confirmed. The kind of quiet unraveling that doesn't make the news, but everyone in town notices. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. I felt distance, like watching the slow collapse of a building you were once locked inside of, grateful to be outside now, but still haunted by the smoke. It was around that time I started training someone, Diego, 19, broke, brilliant, and too soft for the world that had already chewed on him. He reminded me of me before I stopped begging for recognition. He worked hard, asked sharp questions, didn't flinch when I got quiet. I saw what mentorship could be, clean, empowering, not manipulative. I told him early on, no one's coming to save you. But you can build something so strong, no one can take it from you. He nodded like he already knew that pain. One evening, Diego asked me, "You ever have a family?" I didn't flinch. Once, I said, but they mistook sacrifice for failure. He looked at me like he understood too well, and we never spoke of it again. The scar tissue, I realized, was the part of me that didn't need to explain myself anymore. That didn't seek validation from ghosts. That didn't ache when holidays passed in silence. It didn't mean I wasn't hurt. It meant I had learned how to carry pain without letting it rob me. I still had the voicemail from the last time my father said my name, years ago, a single line before he hung up. "You should have stayed loyal." I played it once, alone in the dark, and whispered back to the silence. I did. You just didn't know where to look. I hadn't planned to return. Not really. Not in the way people imagine, with suitcases full of vengeance or some triumphant speech rehearsed in my head. The truth was quieter, slower. It started with a business trip, a small seminar I'd agreed to speak at on systems integrity and internal fraud. I was already nearby, just 2 counties over, and something in me said, drive through. Just once. Just look. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't nostalgia. It felt more like standing over a grave to prove to yourself the thing is really dead. The town hadn't changed much. The streets still curled in familiar patterns, lined with half-kept lawns and mailboxes leaning like drunks in the heat. I passed the old hardware store where I used to fix price tags after school. The sandwich shop that never remembered my name. It all felt smaller, like the scale had shrunk without me in it. As if I'd been the illusion keeping it large. My old house came into view slowly, like it was ashamed to be seen. The paint peeled now. The shutters hung crooked. A for sale sign was jammed into the dead grass, but the kind of sign you know has been ignored for months. I parked across the street and just sat there, engine off, watching. No one came out. No lights flicked on. I wondered if they even lived there anymore. I went to the corner gas station, the one that used to sell me chewing gum and regret. The clerk looked up from his stool when I walked in, didn't recognize me. I bought a bottle of water I didn't need and casually asked, "Anyone still live in the gray house on Willow?" He shrugged. "Nah, not for a while. Think they got foreclosed or something. Heard the kid, the younger one, got into some trouble. Real bad stuff." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, too casual. He leaned in like it was a secret he'd been dying to tell. "Fraud or some shit. White-collar stuff. State took it serious. Was all over the local paper. Guess their dad's company tanked after that. Shame, too. Big name back in the day." I nodded like I didn't know them. Like I hadn't bled in the bones of that business. Like I hadn't scrubbed their errors out of spreadsheets at 3 in the morning for 10 straight years. I thanked him and walked out before my hands started to shake. The motel they stayed in was on the edge of town. One of those week-to-week places with barred windows and mold that comes free with the sheets. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street and watched the light in room 12 flicker like a dying nerve. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to see. Redemption? Regret? Collapse? Maybe I just wanted confirmation that the world had finally caught up to the lies they fed it. I caught sight of my father a few days later, by accident. He was coming out of a laundromat, balancing a garbage bag full of clothes over one shoulder, wearing the same overcoat he used to scream at me for wrinkling. His posture had changed. He was smaller now, like gravity had won. He looked around before crossing the street, like someone who expected to be watched. And he was. I watched him for a full minute, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. I approached him the next morning, not because I wanted closure, because I wanted to see what he would do when faced with someone he couldn't belittle anymore. He didn't recognize me at first, not until I said his name. James. He turned, slow, eyes squinting against the sun. When recognition finally hit, it wasn't warmth that came through, it was defense. His shoulders rose slightly, jaw clenched, as if bracing for judgment he hadn't earned. You, he said. That's right. What are you doing here? Passing through. He looked away, then back, scanning me like a man looking for somewhere to aim his pride. You didn't have to leave like that. I tilted my head. Like what? Without a word. Just walked out. I waited. Let the silence grow teeth. You called me a shame, I said. At your Golden Boys promotion party. In front of everyone. He looked off toward the street, jaw tightening again. I was angry. You were proud. The silence between us stretched so long I could hear the cicadas hum. He said, we needed you. After you left, the company, I know. Your brother, I know that too. He stepped forward like that meant something. Why didn't you come back? You could have helped. I laughed once, soft and tired. Help? You think I left because I was weak. But I stayed for 15 years, cleaning your messes, sacrificing my time, my youth, my identity. And you called that loyalty a disgrace. So no, I didn't come back. Because I learned something when I left. He blinked. I don't owe you anything. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. And that silence, that pathetic, wordless twitch of his lip, that was the closest thing to justice I'd ever seen. You were the backbone of the company, he said finally, voice small. I know, I said. Then I turned and walked away. They waited for me. Not literally, no one reached out or left a message. But when I showed up again, something in their eyes said they'd been rehearsing this moment longer than I had. I found them sitting at the same cracked motel table, hunched over instant noodles and old paperwork. The air was heavy with mildew and something worse, desperation. My mother's hair was thinner now, gray streaks unapologetic. She looked up first. Her face froze when she saw me, like memory had slapped her awake. He didn't stand. My father just leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms like a man pretending he still had leverage. We figured you'd show up, he said. Why's that? I asked, voice calm. Because family's still family, my mother said, like it was a prayer. No, I said. It's not. They didn't correct me. My brother wasn't there. Jail, I assumed. Or maybe hiding behind some plea deal that couldn't wipe the shame off his name. The golden child's crown had rusted, and now they were left with me, the shame. The disappointment. The only one who hadn't stolen, lied, or begged. You heard about your brother, I assume, my father said, tone clipped, still trying to sound like the man in charge of something. I did. We're ruined, he said, matter of fact. The business is gone. We lost the house. Creditors won't stop calling. Your mother, she's not well. I'm sorry to hear that. You think this is funny? No, I said. I think it's inevitable. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear his teeth grind. For a second, I felt it, that old instinct to defuse the room, soften the blow, rescue the moment. But then I remembered how many moments I'd sat silently bleeding while they passed me over, laughed at me, dressed me up as their cautionary tale. You abandoned us, he said finally. When the business started falling apart, you could have stepped in. You had the knowledge, the skills. And what would you have said at the board meeting? I asked, stepping closer. This is my son, the same one I called a disgrace in front of clients and family and strangers alike. The one I told everyone wasn't worth the seat he sat in. But he's here to save us now, because humiliation breeds loyalty? His silence was all the answer I needed. You told me I was ashamed for serving your dream, I said, voice steady. And now that the dream's turned nightmare, you want to pretend I was part of it all along. You want to rewrite the history. I was angry, he muttered. No, you were honest, I said. That's the part you can't take back. You meant every word. You were proud to say it. You fed it to a room full of people and waited for them to laugh. My mother put a hand to her mouth. She still hadn't said my name. You didn't leave a letter, she whispered. Not even a message. We didn't know where you went. That's because I didn't want to be found. You punished us. I turned to her then, and something in my face must have broken through her practiced grief. No, I said quietly. I finally stopped punishing myself. That's the difference. My father stood now, slower than he used to, like pride had rusted his joints. We're still your family. No, I said again, and the room felt colder with every word. You were the people who taught me that love is conditional. That respect has to be earned over and over, but cruelty gets handed out for free. You fed me shame and called it motivation. You burned my self-worth to keep the other one warm. He started to speak, but I raised a hand. You don't get to talk now. I spent too many years waiting for your approval, too many nights fixing your mistakes while you handed out my credit to someone who couldn't balance a damn checkbook. I stayed because I thought love looked like sacrifice. I left when I realized you only ever loved the version of me that made you look better. My mother was crying now, quietly, like it might still earn her something. I never wanted this, she said. No, I said, voice soft. You just allowed it. And that's worse. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was heavy, not the kind that begs to be filled, but the kind that follows something final. I looked around the motel room. The peeling wallpaper, the stained ceiling, the fading smell of instant noodles and resignation. It was their kingdom now, the one they built by devaluing everything that wasn't golden. It had finally come to match the way they treated me. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm not here to gloat. I'm just here to say one thing, clearly, while you're still capable of hearing it. They both looked up, hollowed out and waiting. You were wrong about me, I said. And everything you're feeling right now? That empty, sinking weight? That's what I carried every day I worked for you. That's what I lived with while you laughed and pointed and handed my years to someone else. So no, I won't help you. I won't save you. I won't pretend we're something we never were. And then I turned toward the door. My father said my name once, soft, shaky. I didn't turn around. Because when a man finally stands tall in his own story, he doesn't need to look back at the people who tried to write him out of it. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. They always do. In towns like that, places where everyone pretends not to know your business but still manage to know the color of your curtains and who your son's lawyer is. I hadn't been back a full week before someone texted me a photo of the front page of the local paper. Former VP faces fraud charges. My brother's face looked different behind the grainy resolution paler, sunken, like someone who had lived on borrowed confidence and finally got the bill. He was scheduled for sentencing next month. No deal. No out. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear. Like the fog that had hung over my chest for years had finally lifted, revealing something harsh and raw underneath. The town was turning on them now, slowly and strategically. Old allies withdrew. Business partners stopped returning calls. Friends they'd once invited to Christmas parties crossed the street when they saw my father coming. That's how it works. People stick around when you're winning. They vanish when your name makes headlines. I watched it unfold from a quiet distance. A contact in finance forwarded me an internal memo. Their former company was under investigation for 6 years of tax misreporting. The foundation I used to patch with midnight spreadsheets and unpaid overtime had finally caved in without me. No one remembered that I'd once been the one holding it all together. But that was okay. That was the point. I hadn't come back to be recognized. I'd come back to bear witness. The most poetic part? They didn't even know how to fight. Not really. They'd spent so many years performing invincibility that when the walls actually cracked, they had no tools left but blame. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that my father was telling people I'd abandoned the company during its critical moment, as if my exit was the domino that brought it down. As if my presence hadn't been exploited for a decade before I walked out. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't correct the narrative. I just lived. And that, I think, made them unravel faster than any confrontation ever could. I'd moved into a loft on the edge of the city, bare brick, tall windows, No family photos. My days were full and private. My clients respected me. My name was clean. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe had dropped. On them. One night, I got a call from a number I hadn't saved. I let it ring. I always did now. But something about it stuck with me, so I listened to the voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice sounded cracked, like something had broken and never healed right. I know you don't want to hear from us. I get that now. But I thought maybe you should know your father's been hospitalized. Chest pains. The stress, I guess. I don't know what to do. I don't know who we are anymore. That last sentence hit harder than the rest. Not because it was manipulative, though it probably was, but because it was honest, maybe for the first time in her life. They didn't know who they were without the illusion of success, without the story they'd built on my silence. I didn't call back. Not because I hated them. I didn't. Hate requires energy, and I'd already spent too much of my life giving them everything I had. I didn't call back because nothing I said would heal what they broke. I didn't leave them. They dismantled themselves the moment they chose pride over love. The only difference now was that the world could finally see the rot they'd hidden so well. Diego noticed I'd been quieter that week. We were reviewing some projections for a real estate client, and he looked up from the screen with that same sensitivity I used to mistake for weakness. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. Just revisiting some ghosts. He didn't press. He never did. That's why I trusted him. Later that night, he handed me a folder. "Something for you," he said. "I tracked down the shell companies your family used. You didn't ask for it, but I figured you might want to see how deep it went." I opened the folder. Page after page of bad paper trails, forged balances, offshore accounts. Most of it was sloppy. Lazy fraud dressed in complicated language. My brother had been clever, but not cautious. He'd mimicked the motions of power without learning the responsibilities that come with it. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "A while," he said. "I was waiting for you to be ready." I smiled. "I am." I forwarded the documents to the investigators quietly handling the case. No signature. No return email. Just an anonymous tip sent from a coffee shop Wi-Fi. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted it done right. The next week, the news broke. More charges added, deeper charges. The kind that don't end in fines. The kind that come with numbers behind steel doors. The town turned colder on them after that. Whatever pity they had left evaporated. Their name was no longer legacy. It was liability. One afternoon, I walked past my father outside the courthouse. He looked thinner, grayer. There was no entourage around him now. Just a cane, a file folder, and the look of a man who finally understood that reputation doesn't make you untouchable. It just gives people a higher platform to watch or fall from. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and chose not to speak. Either way, I kept walking. Past him. Past the history. Past the echo of a name I no longer needed to carry. Because justice had already come, and not with fire or fury, but with facts, time, and the brutal, beautiful silence of someone who finally stopped showing up to prove his worth. It wasn't one big collapse. It never is. It was quiet things, shifts too small to notice unless you were trained to see them. A last name being removed from a donor wall. A company logo quietly scrubbed from a sponsored stadium seat. A former employee, long retired, telling a reporter off the record, they always had things. We just didn't have proof. The story wasn't just unraveling, it was being dismantled, piece by piece, like someone finally turned on the lights in a house full of termites. I watched it all with a strange kind of detachment, the way you might watch a storm wash away a house you used to live in. There was grief in it, yes, but not for the people. For the time. For the boy I used to be, the one who believed loyalty would be rewarded. I thought of him often now, but not with pity. I thought of him the way you think of a soldier who made it home barefoot and scarred, lucky to be alive, but never quite the same. The final fracture came with an email. Not from my family. From their attorney. It was short. Cold. A plea dressed as logistics. "We are attempting to settle remaining debts. Your name is listed on several legacy accounts tied to the business. If you would be willing to sign a release form absolving liability, it would be appreciated. We understand you were not active in recent years, but the company's structure from your time has legal implications." I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. I let them squirm. I wanted them to feel, if only for a moment, what it was like to need someone you trained yourself to disregard. Then I sent back a single-line reply. You relinquished my name the day you weaponized it. I won't carry your wreckage. I attached no signature. I owed them nothing, not even the courtesy of a period. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from my mother. She sounded thinner than ever, like every word was costing her something she didn't have anymore. I know you think we deserve this, and maybe we did, but your father, he's not well. He asks for you. Sometimes he forgets everything else, but he says your name, just your name, over and over. She paused. I don't know if that means anything to you. I just thought you should know. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. Some messages are meant to linger in the air, unsolved, like smoke. That night, I sat alone at the edge of the rooftop garden in my building. The city hummed beneath me, alive, indifferent, free. I poured a drink and thought about the man I'd become, not the man they warned me I'd never be, but the one I'd built brick by quiet brick. I thought about how strange it was that, for all their dominance and wealth and noise, they were the ones begging now. And I, quiet, forgotten, shameful, was the only one who hadn't lost everything. The unraveling wasn't just theirs. It was mine, too. I had spent so many years chasing worth through service, trying to prove that if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, erased myself enough, I would earn a permanent seat at their table. But all I had ever been was a placeholder, a body to prop up their stories, a name to sign the contracts they didn't want to dirty themselves with. The real reckoning wasn't walking away from them. It was walking away from that version of myself, the one who thought survival meant shrinking. I started therapy. Quietly. An office in a building no one knew I visited. The therapist was older, with eyes that didn't flinch when I said, they made me into a ghost before I ever left. She didn't rush to reframe it. She let the sentence hang. And in that silence, I started to feel something I hadn't in years. Recognition. Not from her. From myself. One session, I told her, I think I stayed so long because I thought if I left, it would prove them right. She asked, and what if leaving is the only thing that ever proved them wrong? It stayed with me. Still does. I heard through the grapevine that my father had stopped speaking. Not out of stubbornness, but something neurological, stress-induced, they said. My mother had become his full-time caretaker. The empire they'd built on borrowed image had crumbled, and all they had left was silence and each other. Poetic, in a way. They'd never really needed anyone else, not truly. Not until they did. And by then, it was too late. They'd built a house with no foundation, and they were surprised when the walls came down. But the story wasn't about them anymore. It was about the space they left behind, and who I got to become in their absence. I didn't need their apology anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't even need their collapse to be dramatic. The beauty of their downfall was how ordinary it looked. No explosions. No grand gestures. Just failure, soft and slow, like an apology whispered too late for anyone to hear it. And as they unraveled, publicly, legally, emotionally, I kept building, brick by brick, quietly, deliberately, unshakable now. Closure doesn't arrive like a parade. It doesn't knock on your door with a bow on it, offering itself up as a gift for surviving. It creeps in sideways, almost unnoticed. In the quiet things. The untensed jaw. The morning you wake up and forget, for a whole 2 minutes, that you were ever angry. The moment you realize your life no longer bends around the ache someone else left behind. It came to me on a Thursday. I was sipping coffee in a quiet cafe I'd grown fond of. One of those places where no one talks above a whisper and the barista knows not to ask personal questions. The morning sun hit the back of my hand through the window, and I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Steady, unshaking, alive. The weight in my chest, the one that had lived there like a squatter for years, was simply gone. That was the day I knew I didn't need to check on them anymore. Not my father, wasting into himself in some care facility. Not my mother, circling what was left of her pride like a woman sweeping a shattered vase into a corner. Not my brother, still waiting to hear how many years the system would press down on him in return for what he stole. I no longer needed to know what room they sat in, what story they told themselves, whether they still cursed my name or longed for it. They were still living in the story of what should have happened. I had already stepped out of the story completely. The business I'd quietly built, shell companies, consulting work, long-term clients who respected silence over spectacle, was thriving. Not loudly, not in the way they used to flaunt it, but in a way that was rooted, durable. I didn't chase expansion. I chased integrity. I knew too well what it cost to win without it. Every decision was deliberate, every risk calculated. Not once did I put my name on something I didn't believe in. I'd even started mentoring others, young men mostly, who reminded me of the boy I used to be. The ones who were overlooked, underestimated, carrying bruises they didn't have language for yet. I didn't offer them money. I offered them something scarcer, belief. I told them what no one had told me when I was drowning in a house full of names and titles and cold dinners. You are not broken. You are not a burden. You're just beginning. One of them, Marcus, had just landed his first client when he asked me something that stopped me mid-breath. Did you ever forgive them? He didn't mean it cruelly. He meant it like someone studying the map ahead of him, trying to figure out where it ends. I looked at him, this kid with fire in his chest and a tremble in his hands, and I realized I had an answer. No, I said, but I stopped needing to. Forgiveness had been a kind of currency in our house, used to buy silence, traded for fake peace. I learned the difference the hard way. Forgiveness that is demanded isn't real, and justice doesn't require it to be delivered. I hadn't forgiven them. I hadn't needed to. What I had done was take my pain and build something unshakable with it. I had taken everything they left hollow and filled it with purpose. Some nights, when the city was especially quiet, I'd stand by my window and look out across the skyline. There were no ghosts anymore. No echoes. Just the sound of the present, mine. Entirely mine. And when I thought of them, it was like remembering a distant illness. Something that once threatened to kill me, but didn't. Eventually, I received word that my father had died. There was no funeral invitation, no grand announcement. Just a one-line obituary buried between a plumbing ad and a local coupon. James Whitlow, 67, survived by his wife and 2 sons. No mention of the empire. No tribute. Just a name, alone. I didn't attend. I didn't send flowers. I didn't post a quote or light a candle. Instead, I went for a walk. It was raining not hard, just enough to make the air honest. I walked without destination. No suit. No umbrella. Just my hands in my coat pockets and my breath steady in my chest. And in the middle of that walk, I stopped. Right there on the sidewalk. Eyes closed. Water dripping from my lashes. And I whispered the last thing I ever needed to say to him. You don't get to haunt me anymore. Not in shame. Not in silence. Not in the little voice that used to ask if I was enough. I was. I am. I always had been. They just couldn't see it because they were too busy staring at a reflection of themselves. Closure didn't come because they finally broke. It came because I stopped needing their pieces to rebuild myself. That's the thing about rebirth. Nobody sees it when it happens. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with peace. And peace, I've learned, is the loudest freedom in the world. If this story hits something deep in you, if you've ever been discarded, underestimated, or called a shame for simply surviving, then do me a favor, like this video, drop a comment about what part wrecked you most, share it with someone who needs to feel seen, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story that cuts just as deep. See you soon in our next story, which drops soon.